The car of Alex. He stopped before he even understood why. The headlight cut through the empty road and illuminated a detail impossible to ignore. A torn cardboard box, placed with too much care to be trash, right where the asphalt meets the bushes. Inside, a clean piece of cloth, almost like an improvised bed, and small marks around it, light, circular footsteps, as if someone had walked around it without the courage to leave. Alex got out slowly, without making a sound. The air had a damp and strange smell, and then he heard a faint sound, almost swallowed by the silence, coming from where there shouldn't be anything. A child. She was sitting near the box, too small for that forgotten place. She wasn't crying. She just gripped the cloth tightly, as if it were an anchor. Alex noticed the fear in her shallow breathing without looking up. He crouched down slowly, keeping his distance. The smell of wet earth mingled with something metallic in the air. There were no adults nearby, no cars, no voices. Behind the child, something moved slightly, almost imperceptibly. Alex's routine was simple. He worked as maintenance assistant. He used to drive down that road every day and never stopped. That night broke the pattern. That's when he saw the bitch. She lay partially on something he couldn't yet see clearly. Her body was tense, not tired. Her gaze didn't plead for help. It observed. The puppy. He seemed to measure every human gesture with uncomfortably precise precision, as if anticipating a wrong decision. A quick movement revealed the puppies. They were huddled under their mother's body. They were too small to be abandoned. The dog touched one of them with her snout, silent, firm. Child. He watched the scene without moving, as if he already trusted that gesture more than any adult. Alex felt a tightness in his chest, but he restrained the impulse to act. Something there wasn't just abandonment. It was waiting, and he didn't know exactly for what. Alex took a cautious step to the side, trying to get a better look without encroaching on the space. The dog reacted before he could finish the movement, repositioning her body almost mathematically, keeping herself between him and the dog, child and the puppies. There was no growling. There was no visible tension. Just presence. The puppy, he lowered his snout and began to sniff. The floor slowly moved as if reading something invisible. Alex felt the silence grow denser, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for haste, but demands attention. He tried to speak to the child, his voice low, using simple words. No response. Her gaze didn't leave the dog. That's where the trust Alex realized that the puppies, they weren't moving as they normally would. They weren't crying. They weren't fighting for space. They were too quiet. The dog looked up for a second, directly at Alex, and then looked around again. It didn't seem like fear. It seemed protection conscious, too calculated to be common instinct. The wind changed direction and brought back that hard-to-name smell. It wasn't strong. It was persistent. The dog interrupted the sniff, and he lay motionless, his muscles rigid beneath his skin. The puppies, they moved closer to her body, as if responding to a silent signal. Alex felt a strange tightness in his stomach. The road remained empty, but the atmosphere no longer seemed safe. There wasn't a danger, sure, just a feeling that something was out of place. Alex thought about picking up the phone, but he didn't. The dog was watching every micro-decision, every pause, every hesitation. He realized that any sudden movement would break something fragile there. Child. She was breathing shallowly, gripping the cloth tightly, as if it were the only solid thing that night. Puppy, it moved again, drawing a small circle on the ground with its snout, always in the same spot, always returning to the same place. A distant sound echoed down the road, something metallic, too fast to identify. Alex turned his face away reflexively. The dog reacted first, positioning her body more firmly. She didn't advance, she didn't retreat. She simply blocked. The puppies, they shrank back at once, as if they already knew that sound. A loyalty. That mother wasn't noisy. She was silent, tense, almost harsh. Alex sensed that this wasn't the first time she'd needed protect. The feeling of being watched grew, not by someone visible, but by the environment itself. Alex noticed marks on the ground, some faded by the rain, others too recent. The dog returned to sniff slower now, as if time were a decisive factor. The silence seemed to carry expectation. A child. She looked up for a second and stared at Alex. She hadn't asked for anything there. There was only an unspoken question, and the answer didn't yet exist. Alex took a deep breath and realized he was unconsciously copying the dog's rhythm. Slow, controlled. Each breath felt like a choice. The puppy kept his snout down, sniffing in short lines, always returning to the same point on the ground. It wasn't curiosity, it was persistence. Akilled, he followed every movement with absolute attention, as if he already understood something that Alex had not yet grasped. The puppies, they remained too quiet. The whole scene seemed suspended, as if any hasty decision could break an invisible balance. A distant headlight appeared around the bend in the road and then disappeared. It didn't stop. It didn't slow down. The dog watched the reflection of the light and then looked back at Alex. There was no fear there. There was assessment, the kind of look that measures intention, not force. Alex felt a weight on his chest, as if he were being tested without knowing the rules. Loyalty. That mother's expression wasn't about closeness, but about restraint. She didn't move forward. She kept everything exactly where it needed to be. Alex tried to move to the side, seeking space, and again the dog adjusted her body, blocking the passage with precision. It wasn't aggression. It was decisive. Puppy. He seemed to understand human limitations better than many humans. Guild, she pressed the cloth against her chest and closed her eyes for a moment, as if waiting for something to pass. The puppies. They moved together, forming a small cluster beneath their mother. It didn't seem improvised, it seemed like repetition. The wind brought back that hard-to-identify smell. It wasn't blood, it wasn't garbage, it was something cold, metallic, out of place. The dog interrupted their sniff, and he remained motionless for seconds that were far too long. Alex felt a shiver that didn't come from the weather. The road continued empty, but the silence was no longer neutral. It was heavy. The feeling of danger, it wasn't pointing outwards. It was pointing toward what hadn't yet been seen. Alex thought about carrying the child. He put her in his lap and left. He thought about taking the puppies one by one. He thought about calling for help. Each thought seemed wrong for a different reason. The dog watched everything without interfering, as if allowing him to make mistakes or get things right. The puppy touched one of them puppies with his snout. He turned to face Alex again. He hadn't asked for anything. There had been waiting, and that made him more uneasy than any clear threat. Time began to stretch out strangely. Minutes seemed longer. Alex noticed new marks on the ground, almost faded, as if someone had recently passed by and tried not to leave any trace. The dog returned to sniff, now in smaller, precise circles. Akilled, she opened her eyes and looked straight at him. For the first time, Alex understood that this night didn't require haste. It required trust, and trusting without understanding was the hardest part. Time passed without Alex realizing exactly how much. The road remained empty, but now it seemed to be watching them. He tried to rationalize what he saw. A kill too quiet, one puppy too attentive, puppies, too many properties. Nothing there followed the usual pattern of abandonment. The dog returned to sniff. The floor, persistent, always in the same spot. Alex wondered if he wasn't over-interpreting. Maybe it was just tiredness. Maybe he was creating meaning where there was none. Doubt began to gnaw at him, trust that he had felt minutes before. Alex stood up slowly, stretching his legs, and the dog's reaction was immediate. She didn't advance. She didn't retreat. She simply positioned herself between him and the group, firm and silent. The gesture bothered him. For the first time, Alex felt irritation mixed with fear. What if that puppy? What if he was wrong? What if he was just protecting himself on instinct, without understanding the real risk? Loyalty, sometimes blind, she thought. Achilled, she remained quiet, as if the argument were happening too far away for her to reach. A new sound came from the road, closer now. Footsteps. Not hurried. Measured. Alex turned his head, trying to identify the source, but the light didn't help. The dog noticed first. His body stiffened, his muscles tense beneath his skin. The puppies, they moved in unison, clinging to their mother's womb. Alex felt the urge to act, to take control of the situation. Perhaps it was time to ignore the instinct of the dog and do what seemed logical. He thought about calling out loudly. He thought about waving. He thought about showing that there was a killed there. But something held him back. The dog kept its gaze fixed on the darkness, not on the sound, as if the danger wasn't where it seemed. Alex felt the conflict growing inside his chest. To trust that puppy, it meant going against one's own judgment, and trusting too much could put everyone at risk. The silence stretched on again, heavy, demanding a decision. It was at that moment that Alex noticed the detail that had made him hesitate. The marks on the ground weren't just from the road. They were from the bushes, and they weren't old. The dog returned toss-sniff right there, insistent, precise. Achilled, he pressed the cloth against his chest and closed his eyes. Alex felt a knot in his stomach. Perhaps the mistake wasn't trusting the dog too much. Perhaps the mistake was doubting him too soon. Alex felt the weight of responsibility tighten in his chest. He looked again at the child. He tried to find a clear sign of what to do, but the dog's face remained closed, too tired to ask for anything. The dog remained motionless, its body still forming a firm barrier. Puppy. He seemed indifferent to human discomfort, as if bound by a rule Alex didn't understand. Doubt grew. What if that wait was dangerous? What if time was being wasted? Trust it began to waver, threatening to succumb to the impulse to act too quickly. A dry, short, almost accidental noise came from the bushes. Alex took an instinctive step forward and stopped. The dog responded with a minimal but decisive movement. The puppies, they stirred for a second and then fell silent. That coordinated reaction didn't seem improvised. It seemed learned. Alex felt a shiver run down his neck. Perhaps that mother had faced something like this before. Perhaps this wasn't the first night she had needed to protect. The idea unsettled him, as if he were entering a story that was already underway. Alex's mind searched for logic. Abandonment is usually chaotic, rushed, messy. This wasn't. There was too much order, too much silence. The dog returned to sniff. She stopped, now closer to the edge of the bushes. Her gaze remained fixed and unmoving. Puppy, he was breathing slowly, as if telling an invisible story. Alex thought about ignoring that behavior and following his human instinct, but something stopped him. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was respect, or maybe it was the unsettling feeling that the dog knew more. The road seemed distant, even though it was right there. No cars were passing by now. No light cut through the darkness. Alex felt isolated within his own decision. Child, he opened his eyes and looked at him again, not pleadingly but with silent expectation. That disarmed him. He realized that any choice there would leave its mark. To trust in Puppy, it meant accepting the unknown. Ignoring it meant taking control without all the pieces. The conflict was no longer external, it was internal. Alex took a deep breath and lowered his gaze to the ground. That's when he noticed something different. The ground seemed disturbed in specific spots, as if someone had stopped there more than once. The dog touched the same spot with her snout, insistently, and then raised her eyes to him. There was no urgency in that gesture, there was certainty. Alex felt his stomach churn. Perhaps the mistake wasn't in the dog's silence. Perhaps it was in the human haste to solve everything without understanding what was truly being protected. Alex felt his own patience wearing thin. It wasn't anger. It was fear disguised as logic. He thought that perhaps he was romanticizing the situation too much, attributing excessive intelligence to a puppy tired. The dog remained there, steadfast, as if time had no value whatsoever. The puppies, they breathed together in strange synchronicity. Agile, he remained motionless, as if he had already chosen who to trust. Alex realized that if he was wrong, there would be no going back, and that awareness weighed more than any decision. A new sound emerged, clearer now. It wasn't coming from the road. It was coming from deep within the undergrowth, low, irregular, almost muffled. Alex felt an immediate urge to move forward, to shout, to do something. The dog reacted first, repositioning herself with silent firmness. It wasn't a warning. It was a boundary. Puppy. He wasn't looking at the sound. He was looking at Alex. That disarmed him. For the first time, he felt he wasn't being stopped. He was being tested. Doubt turned into open conflict within him. To trust in instinct acting like a dog meant ignoring everything he'd learned about acting quickly, solving problems, and controlling things. But acting now could break something he didn't yet understand. Loyalty. That mother's behavior didn't seem emotional, it seemed strategic, calculated. Alex realized that the dog wasn't just protecting the puppies, your child, he was protecting a time, a specific moment, and that made him too restless. Silence returned to dominate the space, heavy, almost suffocating. Alex felt his heart pounding in his ears. The dog returned to sniff, the ground slower now, as if confirming something. Chilled, he closed his eyes again, taking a deep breath. It didn't feel like waiting for help. It felt like waiting for something to end. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. Maybe that night wasn't about immediate rescue. Maybe it was about not interrupting something before its time. That's when Alex made the decision that would change everything. He took a step back, not out of fear, by choice. The dog relaxed a millimeter, almost imperceptibly. The air seemed to change along with it. Alex understood that he had just crossed an invisible line. To trust in that puppy, now it was no longer hesitation. It was a commitment, and without knowing it, he had just placed himself within a truth that was not yet ready to be revealed. Alex's step back was not small. It was a conscious, almost painful retreat. The dog noticed immediately. Her body, previously tense like a stretched rope, relaxed enough to allow air to circulate again. Puppies, they moved for the first time without fear, one of them letting out a low, short sound. Egg-heeled, she opened her eyes and took a deep breath, as if she had been holding her breath for too long. Nothing had been resolved, but something essential had changed. The silence was no longer a threat. It was preparation. Alex felt an unexpected emotion wash over him. It wasn't relief, it was recognition. That puppy, I wasn't improvising, I was leading. The dog returned to sniff now, in a less rigid way, as if confirming a path already chosen. Alex realized he was no longer observing a scene of abandonment, but participating in something carefully kept in suspense. Loyalty that wasn't blind instinct. It was a repeated decision. He felt his eyes burning, without understanding why, and swallowed hard. The first concrete detail emerged almost hidden. Beneath the disturbed earth, something reflected the lighthouse beam for a second too short to be accidental. Alex crouched down slowly, attentive to the dog's reaction. She didn't block. She didn't advance. She just watched. He carefully pushed aside the earth and found a small, metallic, crumpled object. It didn't look like trash. It looked like it had been left behind. And child, he leaned forward when he saw that, and the dog touched the ground with her snout, confirming it without words. Alex held the object in his hand and felt its symbolic weight. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't dangerous at first glance. But it was there for a reason. Puppy, he observed everything, attentive to human gestures. The dog didn't approach. She gave him space. That marked him deeply. She didn't need to control him anymore. Trust it had been granted. Alex felt his heart race, realizing that this small discovery didn't explain everything, but it completely changed the meaning of that silent wait. A child, finally she spoke, her voice low, almost a whisper that seemed unwilling to exist. Few words, fragmented. Enough for Alex to understand that there was someone who should return, someone who hadn't returned yet. The dog raised her head upon hearing the human voice, and the puppies, they moved closer to her belly again. Alex felt the weight of the emotional revelation building. This wasn't an end, it was a pause, and something even greater was about to emerge. Alex examined the object more closely in the headlight. It wasn't ordinary trash. There were signs of recent use, small scratches, as if it had been handled hastily. He looked around, trying to connect it to the silent surroundings. The dog followed his every movement without interfering, simply present. Puppy didn't seem anxious for him to understand quickly. He seemed confident that understanding would come in due time. Child, he watched in silence, his gaze fixed on the object, as if there was something there that explained the waiting. Alex walked a few steps in the direction where the dog had been, sniffed so many times. The ground had small irregularities, subtle marks that a distracted person would ignore. He knelt down again, brushing away leaves and damp earth, and realized there was more than one disturbed spot. It wasn't accidental. It was a pattern. The dog came close enough to touch the ground with her snout, and then moved away. There was no celebration, only confirmation. The silence seemed to agree with that partial discovery. Understanding began to slowly take shape. This wasn't a wait for immediate help. It was a wait for something to return, for something that had been left there with the implicit promise of coming back. Child. She gripped the cloth with less force now, as if the tension had eased slightly. Puppies. They moved restlessly, sensing the change in the environment. Alex realized that the puppy, he had kept everything intact, protected the space, preserved the signs, not out of attachment to the place, but out of respect for what still needed to happen. A distant noise broke the silence, different from the previous ones. Not metallic, not abrupt. It was a human sound, weak, irregular. Alex raised his head immediately. The dog did too. But this time she didn't position herself as a barrier. She just remained alert. Puppy. He didn't seem alarmed. He seemed prepared. Killed. He straightened his body, his eyes fixed on the darkness. The air seemed to change again. Alex felt a tightness in his chest, understanding that something was finally approaching. Alex realized at that moment that the biggest mistake would have been to act sooner. If he had taken it to child, removed the puppies, had that scenario been broken, none of that would have been revealed. The dog wasn't just protecting lives, she was protecting a truth in the making. Loyalty. There, it wasn't emotional. It was precise. Alex felt a lump in his throat, recognizing that the hero, that story didn't need to be announced. It simply remained, silent, waiting for the right moment. The human sound gradually took shape, a dragging step, a breath too short for someone rested. Alex remained still, feeling his own body demand action, while his mind recalled the choice he had made. The dog stood firm, but did not block. She simply observed the darkness with full attention. When the silhouette appeared, there was no running or screaming. There was silent recognition. Killed, he stood up slowly, still without speaking. The puppies. They stirred for a moment and then calmed down, as if that movement had already been foreseen. The man appeared exhausted, his clothes soiled with dirt, his gaze lost between guilt and relief. He stopped when he saw the scene intact. The box, the blanket, the dog, the child. The silence between them was heavy, laden with unspoken things. Alex realized it wasn't deliberate abandonment, but a poorly explained absence, interrupted by circumstances that had nothing to do with the situation. The dog took a step closer and stopped. There was no accusation in that gesture. There was confirmation. Puppy, I had kept everything exactly as it needed to be. The man tried to speak, but his voice failed him. Child, he took 2 steps forward, hesitated, and then stopped. The dog watched without interfering. Alex felt the human impact of that silent reunion. It wasn't a classic rescue scene. It was the correction of a mistake, a time that needed to close. The puppy, it didn't bark. It didn't move. It simply maintained the scene with a firm presence, a loyalty. There, applause wasn't required. What was required was respect for what had been preserved. Alex realized the metal object made sense now. An improvised signal, a promised return. The dog had understood. Child eye had waited. The puppies, they had been protected. The revelation was not shocking because it was dramatic, but because it was simple. The greatest danger would have been hasty intervention. Hero in that story, no one had been saved by running. They had been saved by keeping everything in its proper place. For as long as necessary, Alex felt his eyes burn without any shame. When the man finally knelt down, it wasn't the dog that approached first. It was the child. The mother dog watched calmly, as if she knew her mission was accomplished. Alex took a step back, returning the space. The air seemed lighter. The road reappeared. The silence slowly dissolved. There, Alex understood something she wouldn't have learned otherwise. Sometimes, the right instinct doesn't push you forward. It teaches you to wait. Help arrived without haste or fanfare. A simple car stopped at a respectful distance, as if the scene itself demanded caution. Alex explained the bare minimum, letting gestures speak louder than words. The dog didn't move away from them. Puppies, but it also didn't prevent them from getting closer. The puppy, he observed each movement, attentive to the intention, not the form. Child, she remained close, now less tense, breathing more deeply. Nothing there seemed like a classic rescue. It seemed like a delicate transition, in which each step needed to honor the time that had been preserved. You puppies, they were examined calmly, one by one, without haste. They were fragile but stable. The dog followed the process without anxiety, like someone who trusts in care when it arrives in the right way. The man, still shaken, stayed close, assuming responsibilities that had previously been postponed. Alex realized that this scene didn't call for quick judgments. It called for correction. The puppy, he did not demand rewards. His loyalty, it had been fulfilled in silence, and that was enough. Child, she observed everything, absorbing a peace that was beginning to settle in. As the group moved to leave, the dog walked last, making sure nothing was forgotten. Puppy, he looked one last time at the ground he had protected for hours, perhaps days. There was no attachment to the place. There was closure. Alex felt a pang in his chest as he realized that this constant vigilance could finally cease. The road, once menacing, now seemed just a road. Danger, it hadn't been a confrontation, but an experience of understanding, and that changed how he viewed what came next. During the journey, the silence inside the car wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective. Child, she dozed off, still holding the cloth, now with less force. The dog lay down beside them, puppies, allowing himself to rest for the first time. The puppy, he breathed deeply, as if finally releasing an old weight. Alex realized that night hadn't transformed him into a savior. It had done something rarer, taught him to recognize when not getting in the way is the best way to protect. A trust, that had been the real action. Upon reaching a safe place, the doors closed slowly, without urgency. The environment was simple, clean, and well lit enough to be calming. The dog entered without resistance, keeping its puppies next. The man thanked him with a restrained gesture, without saying a word. Alex responded in the same way. There wasn't much to say. The hero. That story didn't need words. It only needed the right choice to have been made at the most difficult moment, when nobody was sure of anything. The safe place didn't seem like an immediate happy ending. It was functional, quiet, almost clinical. Still, there was something there that had been missing on the road. Stability. The dog walked slowly through the space, recognizing new smells, but without tension. The puppies, they regrouped, now without the constant trembling. Puppy, it seemed different, not vigilant, present, achilled. She sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, observing everything as if needing to confirm that it was real. Alex realized that the real salvation, it doesn't happen in the moment of danger, but when the body understands that it can rest. The man explained what he could, in broken sentences, without trying to justify himself too much. There weren't enough excuses for the delay, only facts. Alex listened in silence. The dog stayed nearby but didn't interfere. Puppy. He didn't react to the words, only to the posture. When he perceived genuine responsibility, he relaxed a little more. Her loyalty, hers, wasn't blind. It was conditional on intention. Killed. She looked at the adult cautiously but without backing down. The environment absorbed that slow adjustment, as if it too needed time to trust. The care was simple and straightforward. Water, food, blankets, nothing dramatic. The dog allowed them to. Puppies were touched, always observing, but without tension. The puppy, it seemed to understand that the time for protecting with the body had passed. Now, protecting meant allowing. Alex felt a tightening in his chest as he noticed this silent transition. Protecting isn't always about keeping distance. Sometimes it's about creating space. Trust, what was once rigid, became flexible, and that required courage. A child, he finally stood up and walked over to the dog. He didn't touch her immediately. He sat beside her. He waited. The dog slowly turned her face and allowed minimal contact. A small gesture. Enough. Alex realized that this was the true end to the tension. Not the adult reunion, not the explanation, but that silent agreement between the one who was protected and the one who protected. Puppy, he took a deep breath. The puppies, they were sleeping. Night, at last, was beginning to recede. Alex stepped back a few paces, observing from a distance. He felt no pride, he felt respect. That story didn't belong to him. He had merely been a piece placed at the right moment. Hero it wasn't about who acted fastest, nor who decided alone. It was about who knew how to wait when all impulses told him to run. Alex understood that he would carry that lesson for a long time. Not every rescue makes noise. Some save lives precisely because they happen in silence. As the minutes passed, the atmosphere began to breathe along with them. The dog lay down completely, something she hadn't done since Alex found her. Puppies. They settled around her body, seeking warmth and security without haste. In Puppy, he closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, still alert, but finally allowing himself to rest. Killed, he watched the scene as if recording something important in his memory. Alex realized that the true consequence of that night wasn't just physical safety, it was the slow reconstruction of trust. Those involved understood, without needing to discuss it, that this episode required ongoing care. Nothing would be resolved in a single night. The dog remained at the center of everything, not as a threat, but as a point of reference. Puppy, she was accepting help now because she had chosen to trust. Loyalty, it didn't dissolve when the danger ended, it simply changed form. Alex sensed that this transformation was rare. Many dogs protect by instinct. Few can recognize when that instinct has already served its purpose. And that made the story even more powerful. A child, Finally, he fell asleep, his body more relaxed than it had ever been before. The dog followed his every movement, but without tension. The puppies, they slept soundly, oblivious to what had been avoided on that road. Alex felt a silent relief, accompanied by an emotional weight difficult to explain. It wasn't happiness, it was awareness. The feeling of having been close to something that could have ended badly and didn't, because someone knew. Wait, not always. Salvation, he arrives in a hurry. The man approached Alex later with a restrained thank you, without exaggerated promises. Just recognition. Alex responded with a simple nod. There wasn't much to add. The dog watched the exchange from a distance, calmly. Puppy. He wasn't seeking approval. He didn't need it. The mission had been accomplished the moment everything remained intact. Alex understood that that night would stay with him for a long time, not as a reminder of heroism, but as a lesson in compassion, silent. When Alex finally got out, the sky was beginning to lighten slightly. He paused for a moment before getting into the car and looked back. The dog was lying down, the puppy's insurance, Achill protected. Nothing there seemed extraordinary now, and perhaps that was the greatest sign that everything had worked out. The road would once again be just a road. But Alex knew that from that night on, he would never confuse action with haste. Sometimes the greatest act of love, it's about trusting in the right kind of silence. Sometimes the world demands speed, and the heart demands silence. Alex learned that loyalty don't shout protégé, that trust don't rush, wait, and that some heroes they save lives without rushing, simply by staying where they need to be. That night, no one won a visible battle, but someone preserved the right timing. And that changed everything. If this story touched you, leave a little paw in the comments.